the participants, those who are from the different part. So I welcome all of you, and let me start the session for the day. And I once again welcome Joseph for accepting our invitation. So Joseph is the Chief Executive Officer and President of the Volvo Institutes. Because he has a very long credential. So let me introduce him in a shorter way. Dr. Joseph is the Chief Executive Officer and the President of the Volvo Institute, specializing in polygraph and forensic science training and education in Yorba Linda, California, USA. He is a retired chief of police for the city of Irvindale, California. He has also served as the chief of the police of the Torrance, California, served as the law enforcement agencies association for the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office and 27 years in the Los Angeles Police Department. With over 40 years in a law enforcement, he brings a broad scope experience and administrative insight into the academic environment. He also served as an adjunct professor of the public administration in the Graduate School of the Public Administration at the Cal State College, Northridge, and the National University in the School of Criminal Justice. He was also a senior vice president of the Wilden Homeland Solutions, specializing in emergency management training as well as specializing in consultation with the state and the local agency and the private sector. He holds a bachelor degree in criminology and from the Cal State Long Beach and the master's in public administration from the University of Southern California. He received a doctoral degree in the public administration and public management at the University of Ladurantey. His doctoral dissertation, Creating Public Value Through Collaboration, has been published, and portion of the manuscript have been adopted through several publications in the several professional journals. So he has published 2 crime novels, Coward, Crook, and the Warriors, and recently released 23 Minutes. He has been involved in the Devil Pups Youth Program of the America since 1967, serving drill instructor and as the liaison representative of the Orange, San Diego, and Riverside Country, as well as the member of the board of the trustee. So I once again welcome all the participants. We have today 2,500 plus registered participants from 25 countries and 115 organizations. Many are going to join the YouTube live. So these are the country, we have a participation from these all countries. I welcome you all on this very exciting session, and the title is itself exciting, Why They Kill Deductive Profiling. So now I request Dr. Joseph C. to continue his session. Thank you for accepting our invitation, sir.
Oh, thank you, Doctor. It's really my pleasure. It gives me a chance to get involved with a lot of different subject matters in our world, and it's always a lot of fun. I will want to say a few things before we get started. One is, most of this presentation is as a result of the studies that I've done throughout the United States. So you have to take what you want out of it for your particular country, because we have a lot of weird crime here. I will tell you, we have it all, and you'll see some of it. I'm going to talk about criminal profiling and a background on the criminology perspective of different theories regarding people who commit crimes. And then we'll do some inductive and deductive profiling. And then if we have some time, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Satanic cult movement and how that all plays out for profiling purposes. So let me see if I can figure out a way to advance this. There we go. We're going to talk about the causes of crime, some of the motivational factors, psychological theories, some of the profiling and analysis, as well as various schools of thought. My background in the bachelor's degree was in criminology, and where we took a look at the making of laws, the breaking of laws, and how society reacts to people breaking the laws. Every society reacts just a little bit different about the breaking of laws. The other issue that I think we all have to look at is the fact that what do we measure? Who measures all this? Who is in the who looks at all of the data that's involved with this, and who does the measuring, and why do we do the measuring that we do about this phenomenon? If you think about it, we view the serial killing profile from a number of perspectives, and probably the biggest one that has never been typified as a serial killing is 9/11, as well as some of the other terrorist threats that have been out there. But crime in every country is a social phenomenon, and we find that a lot of people are repetitive in their criminality, and they do develop some patterns. Some of the ways that we look at serial criminality is through the eyes of terrorism, drug trafficking, money laundering, computer crimes, infiltration into legal businesses, particularly from the drug trade, and illicit arms trafficking, human trafficking, and most recently, the destruction of cultural properties and homicides. So serial killing is not just, serial profiling is just not about a homicide or a series of certain crimes. It is really about, it addresses a lot of the topics that you see there before you. One of the things that we see when we look at serial crimes is that it's a violation of our social norms, yours and my norms and values that we grow up with and we understand as being the difference between right and wrong. We take a look at the people who break laws, and we might agree with them, we might not agree with them, but so I just posed the question to you to think about. Have you ever broken the law? And probably most of us would say, yes, we have. It's human nature that we do that. But what level is that law, and to what degree do we repeat it, is really up to you and I to make that determination. I joke about growing up early on and being maybe a little bit of a delinquent, but not too much, because all of a sudden those social norms and those social values kicked in. And I didn't want to be viewed as somebody who was seen as breaking the law. In America, we have a lot of people that do break the law. They become noteworthy. They hit the press. We have a lot of movie stars, a lot of actors, a lot of athletes, a lot of politicians. All of them seem to get their 15 minutes of being infamous when it comes to being committing crimes, and they get a lot of notoriety for it. We get a lot of notoriety for some of the criminals that are out there. Interestingly, when you take a look at the history of the study of crime, there's many, I wouldn't say several, there's many different theories regarding why people commit crimes. Cesare Beccaria out of Italy, his view was, and this goes back hundreds of years, that individuals choose to commit crime. It's a rational decision after weighing the consequences and determining whether it's appropriate or not, and the fact that I have a free will, so I will commit the crime. Maybe the law is bad, and so I do it because I need to do it, but so the law is viewed as bad, so I don't care as much. But Beccaria's view was that public punishment was appropriate, that it was appropriate to punish people in public, and torture was very common back in his day. I think he was in the 1600s. He had a bunch of principles that he subscribed to, and essentially it's that laws are used to maintain social order, which they are in every country throughout the world. Legislators create the laws, judges impose the punishment. His view was that judges should not interpret the law, but they should impose that punishment according to what the law is. Beccaria also thought that punishment should be based upon the pleasure-pain principle. Do I get more pleasure out of committing the crime than I would if I got caught? And punishment is based upon a number of different factors, and punishment is determined a lot by the level of crime that's committed. Punishment, in his view, was that it should be prompt and efficient and effective. Everybody should be treated equally. He didn't believe in capital punishment, and the use of torture should be abolished. Originally, he supported torture. Later on, he decided that it wasn't appropriate. And his view was it was better to prevent crimes than to catch people in the act. And more emphasis should be placed upon preventing crimes. Now, another school that was, I'm going to try and move my slide here just a little bit. Another school was developed, the utilitarianism theory by Jeremy Bentham, I believe he's out of England, that everything is related to happiness. I do things based upon a cost-benefit analysis. If I think I can get away with it and it benefits me more than it will cost me in terms of pain, in terms of suffering, or public ridicule, then I will do it. And but he said the certainty of punishment is what's important. Punishment needs to be reduced to an absolute certainty, and light penalties are not sufficient. And there's a lot of factors that are outside people's control who commit crime, and many of us will look at it a lot differently. There's the positivist school of crime. There's a period of time when we went through looking at the biological factors as it related to the study of crime causation. We looked at facial features. We studied bumps on the head to determine if bumps were in a certain location, this person was more prevalent to committing crime. And then there was a time too when if two people were suspected of a crime, the uglier one was guilty. And so you would have two people up there, we didn't know which one committed the crime, they would pick the ugliest one. That's how primitive a lot of our initial criminology has been. And then along comes Cesar Lombroso. And his view was that we may have the born criminal, somebody who is born to be a criminal, that the brain interferes with a person's ability to distinguish right from wrong, and that there's social, economic, and political issues that have to be considered. And people can't always be held responsible because they did not choose to commit the crime. They just did it based upon conditions in their lives. And that, again, he adopted the philosophy of Beccaria that it could be prevented through crime prevention techniques, whatever they were. Garofalo, you can't hold anybody responsible for their actions. And it's based, and most crimes committed by poor people who are in poor physical condition and have a criminal personality. And so that becomes some of the basis for how we thought about crime over the years. The Glucks, Sheldon and the Gluck family took a look at somatotypes which were based upon body build, endomorphs, mesomorphs, and ectomorphs, the ectomorph being the more delinquent. a lot of it was based upon your body's shape. Again, biological determinationism. Families produce generations of criminals, and we see that transmitted through a DNA trait all the way down the line. There was a time in our history where we thought, when we looked at families, and if they were producing more than 2 or 3 generations of criminals, then we would take a look at stopping the reproductive efforts of families who were just producing criminal after criminal after criminal. So we have a long history of things that everybody tried to come up with a way of determining. Isaac Ray was one of the first forensic psychiatrists, and his view was that, again, it goes back to the brain that regulates criminal response. And we're seeing more and more studies in that regard that shows that about maybe 25 to 50% of the people that are in prison have defects in their capacity to even manage their own affairs. Other theorists we got more into the sociological theories, and Emil Durkheim, and he was one of the founders of the sociological view. Society was responsible, not the offenders. And society's responsible because there's more to steal. There's other people who have things that everybody should have, that it's governed by these external forces, and criminals learn that it's just a trade. Crime is just a trade that you may grow up in. And punishment should be evaluated based upon the harm. Harm is done. And restitution is based upon reinstatement quickly if you made restitution. In the United States, we're seeing that more with the philosophy called restorative justice. In other words, if we can make the victim whole and the suspect whole in the process and get everybody equally balanced in terms of a restitution, then we can move on and not subject people to the criminal justice system. Enemy is the breakdown of social order. And I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of our communities. I know we're seeing that here in the United States, where there's a loss of those values and standards, and it's replaced by chaos and the lack of social cohesion. So where do we go from here? We've got neurocriminology where the brain's involved. I know I deal with some people in our polygraph training courses that are neurologists and physiologists, and they say that there needs to be more controlled experiments with the brain, taking a look at the brain regarding criminology and what is to be done. The problem that we have in the United States is that we can't experiment. Other countries are. Germany is experimenting. Some of the other countries are experimenting with different things to reduce criminality, but we're still struggling with which of all these themes is the most important. So I put this chart together because I wanted you to see that what we're looking at is a combination of everything that we have seen when it comes to criminal profiling. We can probably take a look at just about any criminal and apply some of these basic theories. It's cultural. It's from more of the classical or the Beccaria view. It's the positivist, the socialist, the biological. Some people will even say it's the body types and genetics. Some will say it's that enemy, the community the lack of standards, the lack of having strong community ties, and then all of that funnels in to that center part of that screen where we say it's all about opportunity as well. So if the opportunity is there, then at some point in time, that's going to electrify and generate those evil acts that we see that are transmitted out of in criminal activity. I talk about this from a theoretical perspective before we get into the more practical. Evil acts are committed for a lot of different reasons. There's opportunity, there's social enemy, there's community values, there is all sorts of different things that result in evil acts being committed. So how do we go about taking a look at it, and how does criminal profiling take a role? Before we do that, take a look at this strain. And the strain that we're talking about is the strain against our value systems, our culture. It's the desire for a certain amount of economic success, but it's also fueled by evil. It's fueled by anger. It's fueled by power, the need for power. It's fueled by people wanting to control. It's fueled by greed. It's fueled by smartness. It's fueled by that balance of pressure and pain of what can I get away with? And there's also the view that it's fueled by excitement. And depending upon the class that you're dealing with for the criminality, you'll see that everybody is different. The lower class, the lower middle, the middle, the upper, and the upper. Everybody has all of these different 8 attributes that we have here in the center box, but they're all dictated by the combination of economic success and this strain, the strain that says that we've got to conform, or we don't conform, we create chaos, and then we commit crime. So a lot of it is based upon what class you're in as to what level of all of these 8 things that you have. And it's not one-to-one. It's very fluid when it comes to that. We're all a little bit greedy. We're all thinking that we're smart. We're all feeling that we can control our anger. We all know that I know that you and I are evil, or I'm not so sure. Well, I'm not evil, but I'm not so sure about you. So think about that for a minute. You may know you're not evil, but how much do you think about the other people and whether or not they are evil as well? And I have to say, after 40 years in law enforcement, I found that there's a lot of evil out there, a lot of evil, and it wears a number of different hats. When we talk about criminal profiling, there are 2 people that I want to introduce you to. I don't know how many of you know about these 2 people or not, but John Douglas was one of the first in the mid-'80s to develop a criminal profiling technique. He and his partner, Colonel Ressler from the FBI, put together the very first criminal profiling unit that we know about. And one of his first efforts was to pay attention to a criminal, a serial murderer in upstate Washington in the United States. That murderer wrote a letter to the media, and John Douglas, at the very beginning of his time as a profiler, looked at it and formed the opinion that the author had no connection to these Green River homicides. When they ended up capturing Gary Ridgway, the Green River serial killer, he admitted to the media that he did write the letter. And he said, and the reporter said, "You didn't sign your name." "I didn't, and I wouldn't," he said. "So we didn't know who it was from." And he said, "Even the FBI didn't think it was from me, but it was." And it was his way of wanting to be caught, wanting to be apprehended. So is criminal profiling legitimate? Is it's more than fortune telling, but it's not an exact science. It's a combination art and a combination of science. It's the process of looking at different personality traits that we see in our communities, and it's taking a look at those characteristics and taking a look at individuals who are responsible for committing those crimes. That really is the definition of criminal profiling. Taking a look at personality characteristics and then taking a look at the individuals who commit those crimes. John Douglas and this writer, this is a list of some of the books that they have written about it. On Netflix, there is a 2-season series called Mindhunter. And if you have not seen it, I suggest that you take the time from your studies and go through it, because I wouldn't call it a television show. I would call it a documentary on criminal profiling. If you have not seen it, it is 2 actors that portray John Douglas and Ressler, but when they do it, the writers did a lot of research with the FBI and interviewed a number of different serial killers. And if this was a full-day seminar, I would bring in YouTube interviews. I would bring in video interviews from different serial killers so that you could see and listen to how they think, why they think the way they do. And it's based upon many of the theories that Beccaria and all of those other names that I gave you kind of combined into one. So these are some of the books that John Douglas has written. I have read Mindhunter and watched the television series. And there's several other. The second book I have not read, Whoever Fights Monsters. It's about 20 years of tracking serial killers with the FBI, with Robert Ressler. The 2 of them wrote that in the 90s when they were just really developing their system. And then Dangerous Personalities by Joe Navarro. But all of those books are really chock full of, how can I say, good criminal profiling material. Is criminal profiling a art or a science? We apply it to only certain crimes. Most of the time they relate to homicides or other repetitive serial crimes that relate to torture, sexual assaults, post-mortem slashing and cutting, pedophilia, fire setting and arson, mutilation murders, rape, and satanic and ritualistic crime. I've been involved in a couple of crime investigations related to the satanic cults. And if we have some time towards the end, I'll share with you some of that information. I didn't get a chance to ask the doctor beforehand, but I didn't know whether India or any of the other countries that listen to this presentation deal with satanic cults, but there's a lot of ritualistic crimes that occur with that. There's certain assumptions about profiling that there's a rationale that I don't want to get into, but these are just some basic assumptions that you take a look at when you profile. you will study a crime scene. And that will give you a certain amount of personality about the offender, whether they're in custody or not. Many times they will repeat the same methods, that they will look for a way to leave a signature at the scene. And generally their personalities for serial crimes do not change dramatically. They may do a few things to alter their activities, but they use the same methods. They will have a signature. For instance, some of the serial criminals end up collecting an item from their victim and keeping it, or they may leave some symbol at the crime scene. So there's a number of different things that they do to leave signatures. And that's something that every forensic scientist, every crime scene investigator looks for when they come upon a crime scene. Profiling really only helps you reduce the number of suspects. It may not give you that one individual person, but it will help you link crimes through looking at indicators and behavior patterns. Some of you are familiar with critical path method and PERT charts and diagnosis of a crime and breaking it down. Many times when you do that for each crime, you will see individual characteristics that keep repeating itself. And so it really does provide investigators with potential leads. It helps you look into different things and take different approaches, whereas somebody without any idea won't know where to look, and they'll waste their time in a lot of areas. Profiling helps provide a certain amount of leads. It's going to assist in the evaluation of evidence. It's for that trial phase. A profiler really makes their due in a trial where they assist in evaluating the evidence to show a pattern of conduct. And it may even help in the interview of an individual when the profiler provides their insight. Again, I want to refer you back to the Mindhunter series, and you'll see that with a number of different serial killers that they interview. And it will create those linkages that we're talking about with the flowcharts about modus operandi and what they leave behind in terms of a signature. So what types of murders do we look at? Well, when you look at the types of murders, you kind of break them down into these four categories. We've got criminal enterprises, where it's really a business, if you will, whether it's organized crime or whatever it is, the drug cartels or whatever. Then you've got the group cause, the sexual homicides, and the personal cause homicides. And murders committed for profit, material gain, money, goods, territory, or as a favor. So though that enterprise is where that takes the place in the business world, where they go after the profit, the goods, the territory, etc. That's really what any kind of organized crime, I don't care what kind of organized crime you call, whether it's gangs, whether it's cartels, or whether it's mafia, or what it is, that there is a criminal enterprise element to it. The group cause has to do more with ideology, and these are acts committed by one or more people that results in death. Gangs and religious hate groups fall into that category, as well as a number of others. And I'm talking fast because I know I only have an hour. The sexual homicides are probably the most prevalent that we see. Murders that involve sexual activity and the sexual element may vary, but the offender is going to kind of fall into certain patterns and certain range, whether rape is involved or whether it's more symbolic sexual assault. And then the insertion of objects and all of that, the use of different tools that profilers or that the criminals use. Personal cause homicides have to do with those interpersonal relationships. It's not motivated by material gain or sex or anything like that. It has a lot more to do with emotional conflict. We've seen that where husbands end up killing their wife, not being apprehended, marrying somebody else, killing that wife, not being apprehended, marrying somebody else, killing that wife. So what we find is that it has to do with that interpersonal aggression. And again, it reflects back on a lot of those profiles that we talked about with Beccaria and others. So what type of murders do we look at? We look at anger, we look at rape, we look at murder, we look at personal cause and the sexual effects of it. They overlap. Many times you can't classify and put them into a box, but they definitely overlap in their psychopathology. When we talk about criminal profiling, there's two different ways to look at it: inductive reasoning and deductive. I want to get inductive reasoning out of the way so that you understand what this really means. Inductive reasoning is a broad generalization based upon data and possibilities, and it does not necessarily always have to result in truth. So you can use inductive reasoning to move forward in an investigation, but it does not always give you the benefit of that. So here's an example. Most known serial killers are Caucasian. Okay, we give that as a premise. Another premise is that most serial killers are male. And most known serial killers operate within a certain comfort zone. Okay, so you have those three elements. The conclusion then is that your serial killer will be a white male operating within a comfort zone. That in and of itself is inductive reasoning, but that's as far as it goes. That's as far as it goes. So inductive criminal profile is a set of characteristics that you've played with, that you've had some statistical inference from. It's based upon a combination of the profile of the victim and a potential profile of an individual, and particularly when they commit the same type of crime. Inductive profiling is really, I guess the best way to term it is it's average. It's the average of anything. So you've got two types of inductive arguments there, from the specific to the general. A 24-year-old white female is raped in her first floor apartment. A detective tells the press that there's a sexual predator on the loose that only attacks white females who live in first floor apartments. That is a part of inductive reasoning. Statistical argument is not going to be reliable, but take a look at this. Published research indicates that serial rapists tend to attack within their own age range and don't normally attack outside their race. Therefore, it can be inferred that the offender is likely a 24-year-old white male. That's the kind of inductive reasoning that you could use without holding yourself totally accountable for that particular profile. So you see how the thought process results with it. You look at the victim, you look at the circumstances, a first floor apartment, you look at the nationality of the female, and then you go from there. And then you develop that overall profile. The problem that you have with inductive criminal profiling is that it's very generalized, and it only limits you to certain populations, and it doesn't let you kind of get out of that model very well. They're limited by certain amount of data because it's only collected from people that we catch. So we'll look at other people that we catch and try and use that information to justify our criminal profile on this particular case. An inductive criminal profile is going to contain inaccuracies that can and have been used to implicate innocent individuals. I go back to the profile on Ridley there, the Green River Ridgway, the Green River killer, and there were inaccuracies on his profile. But once he was caught, what they went back and looked at the issues that were on profile and compared them, and many of those were accurate, but not all of them. And it never implicated any innocent individuals. But I would, again, refer you to the Mindhunter series, and you'll see some of this inductive criminal profiling playing out. Most of the inductive criminal profiling is very nonspecific and is used in a general manner. So deductive reasoning is different. Deductive reasoning it determines, it establishes certain premises, and based upon those premises, it moves to a series of conclusions. It talks about general patterns of behavior that list specific offender characteristics. And deductive reasoning is, I'll give you an example of that. The offenders disposed of the victim's body in a remote area of the mountains. Okay, that's a particular piece of information that is specific to certain types of criminals. Tire tracks were found at the body disposal site. What can we deduce from these facts? Just those two pieces of information. You look at those two pieces of information. The conclusion is that tire tracks belong to the offender, then the offender has access to a vehicle and is able to be mobile. That's one piece of deductive reasoning, okay? It's kind of a if this, then this. And so your deductive reasoning works in that way. It's a set of offender characteristics that converge between physical and behavior patterns within a crime and a series of related crimes that you end up matching up. The information that we use in deductive criminal profiling is includes forensic and behavioral science, much of what you're studying. It includes the assessment of physical evidence. It's a combination of the witness and victim statements, some of the crime scene characteristics that you take a look at, the relationship between the victim and offender. What is it, a stranger to stranger? Is the victim known to the offender? Is it some commonality that they have? Did they go to the same school? Did they live in the same neighborhood? All of that. And then a reconstruction of some of the other physical elements that are involved, the ballistics and wound patterns, photograph sketches, and videos that are used in the crime scene investigation. And then you compile all of that into the report. You take a look at your murder book, if it's a murder, and you take a look at all of these different factors in developing your deductive criminal profile. And of course, the whole theory of victimology, it's the study of victim characteristics. I always marveled that we used to have recidivistic victims. Many of the victims that we saw were continual victims for a lot of different reasons. They may have left let their guard down too much. They may look vulnerable. So you have to take a look at the risk assessment related to the victim, and you take a look at the victimology of a particular victim and develop that victim profile completely before you move on to the suspect profile. And many times you would develop that victim profile and look at their work history, look at their education, look at their living conditions and the living patterns that they have, who they associate with, and overall, what characteristics does this victim have? That can many times lead you to that suspect level. In doing the deductive criminal profile, there's some assumptions that you can make that most offenders don't act without motivation. You may not know what that motivation is, and that part of that is your goal, to find out what that motivation is. And it may only be known to the person that you're going after. They may be the only one that are committing crimes based upon their hate for their mother, or fill in the blank, whatever that is. You may not know that until that person is apprehended. Every offense should be investigated and looked at for its own motivational existence independently. So that criminal profile is that different offenders exhibit the same or very similar behaviors for a lot of different reasons. And you will not find two cases that are completely alike, even though they're committed by the same individual. We have the gentleman, Ed Kemper, who killed about 10 or 12 people. I'm trying to think, he started out first killing his grandparents, then goes to visit his mother, who worked at a college, and ended up killing co-eds, and then eventually killed his mother. And so all of it was based upon the Oedipus complex, the maternal complex that he had growing up. And when you look at that profile, you'll see that there was a constant pattern to it. His pattern was different. He blew his grandparents' heads off with a shotgun and strangled his mother, but all of the co-eds were hitchhikers and were strangled. And so he used a combination of different tools to conduct his killings. Human behavior develops differently, and it's based upon the environment and a lot of biological factors that you deal with. And this behavior is going to evolve over time, and the more they commit the crime, the more pattern you will start seeing with it. And a single offender is capable of multiple motives, multiple different ways, like Kemper was. He found out he didn't like his grandparents, so he took care of them. Then he went out and accosted young girls, and then he went back and decided to do his mother. And so everybody's just a little bit different in that regard. And unfortunately, what you find with serial repetitive people, they want to be caught. They will want to be caught. They will taunt you. The city of New York had a serial killer out there called the Son of Sam. And he wrote letters to newspapers taunting the investigators, taunting the reporters, saying, "You'll never get me, you'll never get me, you'll never get me." Well, guess what? They got him, and he's now serving time. But he loved playing cat and mouse, and so a lot of things happened in the development of his profile that we used in deductive profiling. And it does help, but it's not a specific tool like a photograph is, or a set of fingerprints, or some trace evidence. It is merely an overall profile about how we see people's lives. And no matter what, you may think you cannot deal with any of these people thinking that they're nasty people. You've got to recognize where they came from. Talking to different people. I've only talked to one serial killer in my career because I didn't specialize in that. And most of them are very, they don't see themselves as repulsive. They don't see themselves as disgusting and that. And they're very, they will give you the idea that they're very normal people in a moment. And then the next thing you know, they change. So some strategies. You got to think like a criminal. You have to avoid those moral judgments with people and understand how life experience plays a role. You're going to have some ideas, some intuition over some of the people. Most of the time, you use your good judgment, and it will result in a positive outlook. So that's the basis for deductive profiling. I just want to close with a couple of topics about Satanism and the occult. The material I'm going to show you is really basic. It's not meant to be a complete guide. There's a lot of books out there that are written about it. Some of them professed and written by people who were practice that particular conduct. And it is a movement that is throughout a number of different countries. I want you to all to think about for a minute, what country had a serial killer who committed the most serial crimes ever attributed to one person? What country? Think about that. We'll give you the answer at the end. And all of in this satanic world, and a lot of the crimes that we see have the influence. For instance, we had a serial killer in the United States called the Night Stalker, because he committed most of his crimes at night, all driven by satanic cult thoughts and philosophy and theory. The Church of Satan is run by a council of 9. They have high priests, they have priests, priestess. It's only by invitation only. You can't apply to get in. You have to be invited in. They have an administrative staff, and they have their founder was back in the 60s and 70s, Anton LaVey, and he was headquartered here in San Francisco area. And then we had a hierarchy of the Satanic Church where LaVey, and then he passed it on to Peter Gilmore, who's the current high priest, and then his daughter and Gilmore's wife are involved in it as well. This is Peter Gilmore. I had a chance to meet him, and I was surprised that he was pretty normal. He didn't have all that facial hair at the time, but he was a very congenial person, just a little bit different in his thought process. And so they have a lot of terms of endearment that they use for things. A grotto, you'll see that they use the term evil and juggle the letters to come up with live, and they have covens where they hide. I came across a satanic cave in one of my communities, and where it was an altar, and where they gave sacrifices, animal sacrifices, and human sacrifices, and did human sexual rituals. There's certain days that are set aside when they do a lot of activity. And I don't know if you can see all of this or not, but I will try to move it here. And you'll see that there's certain days of celebration. Sex is involved quite a bit of it, sex with children, and sex between all of the consenting adults. There's bestiality and the drinking of human blood and all that kind of stuff. Here's some of the books that have been written about Satanism. And most of them have been written by Anton LaVey, Peter Gilmore, and several others. Those are just the topics there about the different books. And if you go to YouTube, you'll see some interviews of the Gilmores, and you'll see an interview of Zena LaVey, who's the daughter of Anton LaVey, the founder of the church, and an interview on YouTube promoting her father's book. And then the Huffington Post did an article on it as well. Based upon what your religious values are, what your views are, it's all just different than yours, I can assure you. There's some films that are out there that talk about it. There's a documentary by Geraldo Rivera, and there's some other films out there. The Devil's Reign, which is a Hollywood production about Satanism. And there's degrees of membership, as we mentioned. There's a hierarchy within the church. You only have to pay $200 a year to be a member, and you receive a membership card and all that, but you have to be solicited to come in. It's by invitation only. Their model, their beliefs are based upon Satan and atheism, and they have certain philosophies and principles. I'll just quickly go through them here. They have 9 Satanic statements that they adhere to. Some of them is that vengeance, instead of turning the other cheek, they are very vengeful people, and they have certain sins that they do not, that they profess to not commit, and some of them have to do with just their personality and their individuality as well. And then they have certain principles about how they view life. They don't give opinions. They don't share their troubles with anybody. They don't make any sexual advances to people unless they're given a signal, and they don't take what doesn't belong to them. They don't commit those kinds of crimes. There's 5 goals that they have, and protect yourself from stupidity, raise funds for the church, of course, and they don't have any tolerance for religious beliefs, and they take a look at the total environment that they function in, and it has to be pleasing for them to exist. They have certain symbols. This is their basic symbol. It's a goat-headed god with wings and breasts, and candles are big with them. Black candle, every candle has a different meaning, and so they will spend a lot of time in their rituals with all of that. And this is their mantra, that it's pride, individualism, and enlightenment. And that about does it. And like I say, I have an 8-hour class that I just condensed into 1 hour, Doctor. So I hope I covered some things, and if there's any questions, I'd be more than happy to entertain them.
So thank you so much for such a elaborative lecture. Now I request participant, if any one of you have the question, you can raise your voice, and once you can raise your hand, and once I will allow or announce your name, you can unmute yourself and ask your query. I will try to take few questions from the chat box. It's very tough to read all the questions from the chat box, but if anyone wants to ask directly to Dr. Joseph, they can just raise your hand. And yes, Purva, you can go ahead.
Uh, Greetings to you, sir. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes,
go.
I can.
Okay. Thank you, sir. It was an informative session. My question to you is, how is honor killing associated with, or how does criminal profiling help in honor killing, in the cases of honor killings?
Defending someone's honor,
Yes,
or yes, okay. Uh,
because it is very prominent in South Asian countries. I would
yes.
like to know your opinion on it.
Well, the taking of a life in any way is wrong. There are certain motivations that everybody has, and they're all driven. Some of them are religious based driven, some are philosophical based, some are political based, and I don't think it really matters what the rationale is. I think you hit on a very important thing, is that honor killings, that's a certain classification and a certain person that commits that type of crime based upon being honored, whether it's that they defiled their daughter or their wife, or whether it's a political issue or whatever. So I think uh, you will see that people just don't commit that crime once, that most of the time you'll see that they have utilized that as a rationale. And I would say, I don't think there's any defense to it. And I know people who would defend it. But that's for the court of law. That has nothing to do with looking at the crime itself. And you bring up a very interesting element of committing crimes with based upon honor, and that's not crossed my path. We don't see that too much in the United States, but based upon your question, I'm gonna look at that some more, because I think that there is some applications of some of the sociological and even some of the positive school here of thought, that honor killing can be viewed in a number of different ways. It could, honor torture could be viewed in the same line, but I think it's still a crime in most countries, and it still has to be dealt with by authorities, and it still has to be prosecuted by the courts. And if you can prove that it is an honor crime, then I think it may go to mitigation, but it depends upon the level of violation. If it's political, if it's family related, or if it's religious based. So I would think that if you have those kind of crimes being committed, like for instance, the person I talked about, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, in a way,
Yes, sir.
he felt he was an honor criminal. He was killing people who didn't believe in Satan. So does that make it right? It did in his mind, but it doesn't make it right for you and I.
Yes, sir.
Saras,
Thank you for your answer, sir.
Srivastava, you can unmute and ask your query.
So good morning. Thank you for a wonderful and interesting session. I work a lot with schools and specifically with juvenile crimes. So I believe that the pattern I see is that most of the hardened criminals, that their mind develops right in the childhood, and this pattern becomes more and more aggressive as they grow up. So I would like your view on this, please.
Well, I would agree with you up to a certain extent. I I think the people who turn bad, you can and do commit these kind of horrendous crimes, do end up. Many of them, you look back at their upbringing, and it was clear that they weren't brought up appropriately. However, we had a serial killer here, Jeffrey Dahmer, who killed young men and cut them up, put them in acid and barrels and all that. And I've got an interview that I could show you. You could go on YouTube and look at it. And he is interviewed with his parents. And his parents were decent people. And they had an exchange with the interviewer with all four of them there. And so I think every case has to be judged on its own merits, but good people that have been raised well can be good, can go sideways, and so can bad people or people who weren't raised well turn out to be good people. I had a friend, and I think about it all the time. I had a friend who, his mother was a prostitute and his father was just a customer of hers, and he never knew her. And he had every reason to not grow up well, but he did. He became an assistant chief of police. He became a very educated man. And so you can't apply all of those different factors to everybody. It's a again, we get back to the topic, criminal profiling, and it is that deductive reasoning. I'd hate to say that everybody who only was brought up by their mother would be a criminal. That's not the case. But you go back to some people like Edward Kemper here, who was only brought up by his mother, and clearly there were issues there. So it's not a science. It's more art than it is science. I wish 2 and 2 was always 4. It isn't, unfortunately.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Yugal Pathak, you can ask your question.
Yes, sir. I would like to ask, like in forensic psychology, I read in the book by Gordon Kerr, Mapping the Trail of a Crime, that criminals are born from the birth with a evil mindset, and soon they grow up. With their environment to commit bigger crimes. Like their crime ratio increases with time, and at a time it comes that you are not able to change them, or you are not able to stop them. So, sir, what you say on that? If a criminal is growing from his childhood and committing bigger and bigger crimes, would there be any help from forensic psychology to change him or change his mindset later?
Well, there's a lot of studies being done on that right now as we speak by neurologists, physiologists, electrophysiologists, and all taking a look at the mind, taking a look at the brain, and whether or not there is exactly something that you say, that is this person born to be a criminal. A lot can depend upon environment. Much can depend upon, I think, the instilling of certain values and early on in people's upbringing. That can be done by anybody. It can be done by a foster parent. It can be done by an aunt or an uncle. And so, are they born that way? Well, a lot of scientists would say yes, and a lot of scientists would also say stop repeating the gene pool. Stop that. Don't let them reproduce, because they're going to produce more like themselves. I'll leave that to you as to whether that is a value that you would embrace. That's, but I think for the most part, we as human beings have a tendency to think we can fix people. No matter what, we can fix people. And there was a time that I thought that I could, that even though somebody might be born to be a criminal, that I thought I could change them. But it only took me about 5 or 6 years in the real world to determine that there's just a lot of evil people out there. And it's up to us to hold that line, if you will, to go take care of them. And by that, I mean that some people need to be put away. And so I don't want to imply my own theories to this, but my thoughts is that there's evil people out there and they have to be dealt with.
Twinkle Jan, you can ask your question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
So that was a wonderful session. I actually had 2 questions. First was, what are your thoughts on vigilantism? I mean, a lot of series out there just promote people handling their own jury and justice. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, where did we go wrong? I agree with you that it is, we're seeing it more and more. But again, it's that social enemy, it's that loss of value systems, and it's that it's putting the whole system into a chaotic environment that results in this vigilante approach. And I think that we have to get back to much more of a grounding in our values, in what we hold dear. And we have to teach that. We have to teach about being an ethical person. We have to, and it doesn't mean you have to be Miss Goody or Mr. Goody all the time, but you have to teach people how to be. Give an example. I just got a new puppy. Okay, I have a new dog, and she is driving us crazy. She started out evil. We have to teach her not to be evil. We have to teach them how to behave, how to be acceptable there. Sitting right next to me, I've got a shock collar. I put a collar on her, and she gets an electrical charge if she does something wrong, and we have to call her out on it. Maybe that's something that we have to think about for people out there anymore. I don't know, but I think that we have to teach the appropriate behavior. We can't just teach that, oh, you can do anything that you want, and as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. I don't think that's the case. Vigilantism is a system that's broke down. If we have vigilantism, it's a system that has broken down that we need to fix. And I wish I had all the answers. If I had all the answers, I'd be out there doing something with it. But and you had a second question too.
Yes, sir. I read about Jim Jones's mass murder, but I couldn't find the particular reason why he went ahead with the whole mass suicide. I mean, can you?
Well, that's one of those cults, very similar to a satanic cult. But there's a lot of different types of cults out there, and his was religious based, but it was also communal based in wanting to start his own community and get away from everything. Very ritualistic in a lot of work that he did. And as I recall it, now it's been a number of years, but he tried to get out of eventually doing what he ended up doing. He tried to stop everybody committing suicide, but it was too late by then. He had sold them a bill of goods. He had sold himself so well as a leader that they listened to him undeniably. And I think that's what happens in a cult. We had that in the United States with Charlie Manson. The Manson girls followed his edict. Charlie Manson never killed anybody, but he got other people to kill people for him. And so there is and I think a lot has to do with people who grow up and they're idol worshipers, and they need that ideology to be fulfilled, if you will. But overall, I think that anytime you look at cults, regardless of the type they are, they're religious of some type, satanic of some type, or even political at some site, you have to consider that there's a reason why they're moving away from our society, and it's just very frustrating, and I don't know that there's an answer to it. I can only study it and look at it after it happens. And when I look at it after it happens, I can see why, but that doesn't change anything. And many of the people that were in that Jim Jones camp, many of the people that were in the Manson camp were people with good upbringing. They didn't come from a disadvantaged situation. Something clicked, and we get back to that brain question again. It might be something in the brain. Don't know. It could be neurological. It could be physiological as well.
So as we are running out of time, and it's around 11 p.m. for the Joseph, and so thank you, Joseph, for Dr. Joseph, for taking a wonderful session and answering maximum question. We have missed few questions by the many participants, but definitely I'll write all these questions and send it to you. Once you will get time, you can answer all these queries, and then we will publish this in a blog, so that people, those who have the question, they can find the answer of their question. So with this, I request you to kindly accept a certificate of appreciation from Sherlock Institute of Forensic Science. Although we are in a virtual space, so kindly take it as a real certificate from our side.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. I'll print it out.
Yeah. So
you do a very nice job. You do a very nice job.
Thank you so much. I'll send it on a email to you. And here I like to thank my team. Here, like to my team, those who supported in several other parts. So my dedicated team, those who have reached to the social media, and I like to give that certificate of appreciation to my dedicated team, Afreen, and other member, Kratika, Vaishnavi, Kailash, Tanya, Dr. Janita, Laksh, Saja, Sudhakar, Pooja, Saddam, Nitika. I also like to thank all the supporters, those who have applied for the certificates. And you all will get your certificate within 24 hours. Your certificate will look like this. With this, I once again thanks Dr. Joseph for accepting our invitation and giving such a wonderful talk, explaining that how that criminal profiling is useful, and giving all the different parameters. All the time was less. Even in the starting, Joseph said that in a 1 hour is less, but due to the time gap and due to this 11 p.m. In the USA, he covered in a tremendous way. I can say it's a fabulous talk, and people will remember your talk. And as we are in a tradition to organize these lecture series on Sunday, for next 2 Sunday, we are going to organize one course that is by the renowned expert Michael W. Street, and we are going to organize this course on introduction of the creating a digital faces for the law enforcement agency. This 4-hour session will be completely on a practical basis, and we will provide that PDF books and other things. And Michael has served more than 30 years to the FBI. He has created many laboratories throughout the world, and we are going to also create a laboratory in India with the help of Michael. And the session will be on 28th June and 5th July, both Sunday. and those who are interested, many of you are in the group, they are already registered, but those who wants to register, they can register, and you will find all the details on our pages. So I would like once again thank you to Dr. Joseph for giving a wonderful session. I request sir to kindly give your concluding remark.
Very good. Thank you. And you have my email, so feel free to have anyone email me.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much. And as after the COVID will get over, we are going to organize one first international biennial symposium by the Association of Forensic Odontology for the Human Rights in Mumbai, September 2021. So welcome you all in that session. And I would once again like to thank you, Dr. Joseph, for taking a time and giving that wonderful session.